Okay, I would like to call the policy meeting to order. This is the February policy meeting. I'm Jen Ionetti, and welcome everyone. We will start with announcements. Ashley.
Thank you. We have been working on streamlining and creating more of a summary focused agenda. So as you take a look at the agenda in front of you, you will notice some differences, and I just want to highlight what those are. So you'll see sections for old business. That's where our second readings are going to be. You'll see a section for new business, and that's where all of our first readings will live. And those first readings are going to be broken out into some different sections. Our review cycle, so we all know that we go through and we have a predetermined set of policies that we want to review monthly. So we've said, this is what we're committed to. So you'll see those that are up for that review in that cycle. You will also see a new section, legal and PSBA PNN recommendations. The Policy News Network puts out 4 installments each year. Hey, these are the legal reviews that you should be looking at. We're currently going back and looking at all of those to see what we've missed, and we'll be sprinkling those in. So that will have its own heading. And then anything that locally comes up, right? We might have some discussion internally and say, hey, we're changing practice or procedure, and that impacts this policy, or this policy impacts a practice that we're talking about. So we need to move that up in the review cycle. So we're really hoping that this will keep us focused and organized in a way that is meaningful to everybody. Instead of saying, what policy did we say that we were going to review next month? This helps out. And then you'll also see a table in each of these headings for the policies. So you'll see in the public content, the name of the policy, and then just some summarized notes so that it gives you an idea of what the intended changes or proposed recommendations are, again, in order to kind of keep us honest, keep us moving, and keep us organized with those summaries. So I'm really hopeful that these changes will help us move through these meetings a little bit easier.
Okay, any questions about the new format? Everyone's good?
I'll just add that we are certainly open to feedback too. So we want to make it work for you. These were things we thought, let's give them a try. But as we go, let us know. The other thing you'll notice, we're going to be projecting them in board docs now. I know we tried Google Docs last month. We're using board docs now. You'll see the green and the red like before. And I'm over here because I'm going to live try to make the changes that we're talking about. That actually helped us significantly last month, that we made them live in Google Docs while we were doing it. Board docs is a little bit more complicated for sharing, but we're gonna try that tonight and see how it goes. So please share feedback on what's working and what's not.
Okay. Well, I do like the new format. It does make it just, it's a lot of, some months it's a lot of reading, and so it just gives you a little bit like, this is what you're looking for as you go through all the text. So thank you very much for that. All right, we will move on to the minutes, and I'm going to ask the committee if they've had a chance to look at the minutes and you're ready to move them on to the legislative. Yes, yes. Jenna, is that a yes, Jenna? Are you up there somewhere? We already had 3 yeses. It didn't matter. Okay, so we are moving that to the legislative. So we are ready to look at second readings, old business.
Want to go through each one of them individually, just kind of summarize where we've been, see if there's any additional feedback, or do you want to just
I think we should,
okay,
just call them up.
Okay. So if we go in order in our table, 004 is first, membership, orientation and conferences. You'll see that everything is in the new format. Any additions are in green. Any deletions are struck and in red. I don't believe that there is anything new that we didn't talk about that we added in here that I want to note. Did anybody have any questions on this second reading?
Anyone? No, it looks good to me. I'm happy to see that we added the military service, so just to raise awareness about that. Jenna has a question.
One question, I went back through, it looked like we made all the changes we talked about before. So I just had two comments maybe. So actually one question, one comment. So there was a section deleted near the end. I don't remember talking about that.
7D.
7D.
Yeah.
I think it was deleted in the first iteration of recommendations. I can't recall any conversation surrounding it.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna just ask what was the rationale for deleting it?
Jenna, I thought the same thing when I quick looked at it. I don't have in my notes that we were removing that, so I don't know if it was an error on our end, or if anybody else remembers something. Jeff, are you remembering something?
No, I think it's gonna be no.
Oh, it was a formatting. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
We deleted it to add it somewhere else, Jenna. Thank you.
And then I had one other comment. So we talked last time about this section that we added on military service. And I think there was a question about whether, you know, somebody who was on military service could still remain a board member and participate via Zoom. I mean, I don't know whether we spoke to the solicitor, but for what it's worth, because you know I love statute, I did look at it. It does say shall, so I'm not even really sure we have that ability. It says shall, and that's what the statute says. So unless the solicitor felt strongly, I'm not necessarily inclined to entertain that because I don't want to get in trouble.
Ms. Evans, I did talk to Mr. Diazio, and he confirmed that the language does need to be as it is to match school code. Yeah. Thank you.
I just had a question. At what stage does the solicitor go over proposed changes?
Good question, Dr. Thomas. So we actually just had a conversation, the three of us, Ms. Ionetti and Ms. Kitten and I. We would like to have implement a practice of policies being reviewed by the solicitor. We can also look into PSBA review. So I am in the process of getting the costs that might be associated with that. I did actually just talk to Mr. Diazio today. He's going to work out some proposals for what that could look like. His suggestion actually was that policies would be looked at by him before they come to first reading so that you would actually see the changes he is also recommending. Like administratively, we would make changes, we would send it to him, he'd give it a glance and maybe give us any feedback before it even comes to you for first reading so that we're not having conversations here and making changes and then he's like, oh, can't do that. So we actually did just discuss that and hopefully we'll have that in the next couple of weeks. As soon as he shares something and I have PSBAs, I'll share that. Is there anything you want to add, Ms. Kitten?
Yeah, just to add that, that would then go in the summary, administration recommendations, legal recommendations.
Okay. All right, so I think, does everyone on the committee agree to move this to the legislative? Yes?
Just one quick follow-up question. Did he have feedback on the proposed language for filling board vacancies, since that was something totally new that we popped in there?
Yeah, we've actually talked to him a lot about that because of just the recent thing. I think I can certainly ask him to look at it again. I think he's comfortable with what we put, and then we would be adding the AR, which we will have before that goes to the second reading for board. That would have more of what we have fleshed out and we talked about last time.
Okay, thank you.
Next on our list is 006, meetings.
I don't
Oh,
think we
go ahead.
actually moved that forward.
Oh, I'm
We
sorry.
didn't move that forward to legislative, did we? We all good? I wasn't, because
Yes.
Dr. Thomas asked a question, and then I was like, I don't know if we actually did what we were supposed to do. Okay, we're good? It's going forward. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun. So 006, meetings, again, in our new format, numbering changes, everything's in green. Cyanetti, I think that you wanted to point out something. Did you want to point out something on this one? I don't remember.
It wasn't this one.
It wasn't this one, okay. So no substantive changes since the last time we spoke. Any questions, comments on this?
Jenna, we can't see you, so, no, okay.
Minor things, we talked about the adjustments to quorum, and I saw those changes were made, so I didn't have anything further.
Okay, so is the committee comfortable moving this forward to legislative? All right.
Okay, 9:04, public attendance at school events. We had quite a bit of discussion on this. Again, strikes in red, new language in green, based on all of our conversations. Don't think that there's anything new that I need to point out from this. Any comments, questions?
Anyone? Jenna? Okay, so we are comfortable moving that one forward? All right, that goes to legislative.
And lastly here, 9:15, booster clubs and parent guardian organizations.
Okay, that was, yeah, I had the one question. This one sentence that we have been wordsmithing. Where is it? Okay, so 2121. Good.
Following
Under,
classifications of individuals are not eligible, that sentence, 2121.
yeah. Okay, so we made it a positive, right? That's what we did. But now, to me, it reads like these are the only two groups of people that can be members in the organization. So I don't think this is a substantive change. I mean, unless I'm missing it somewhere else. The following classifications of individuals are eligible for membership in the organization. So like, shouldn't the first one be parents and guardians of upper Dublin students? Like, you know what I mean? Like the generic, and then these are, go ahead, Stu.
I don't think this is substantive either, but parent 2.1.2.1.1, parents, guardians of district, I think that just said or homeschooled students is the intent there.
No, I think Ms. Ianetti's right, and I think that Ms. Evans is probably making the same point, that when it was not, those two were there, now it is missing the generic parent and
Obvious,
guardian of
right,
student.
right.
Right, the obvious first. So if we add that, parents and guardians of district students, right?
Yeah.
But we
'Cause-
purposefully included homeschooled.
We're saying the qualifier is homeschooled students permanently eligible to participate. So that's the qualifier in there, but the first one would be just parents and guardians of district students.
I think my point was that it should say parents and guardians of district or home, the second of should be an or, I think, or is that?
All right. Of district, the second of shouldn't be there, right? It should be parents, guardians of district homeschooled students. Well, no, okay, so if we go back to we've been working on this policy, and the original way it was worded, it got confusing because it sounded like if a student was on, like temporarily homebound student.
No, I get the, perhaps it's a grammatical point. Parents, guardians of district or of homeschooled students?
No, it's just saying homeschooled students of the district.
They're homeschooled and they
Yes,
live
I
in the
think the of
district.
comes out and we're good.
Yeah,
Two
that
ofs.
one of,
Okay.
and then we need the generic,
I
Yep.
see.
okay.
Parents, guardians of district students.
Okay, there we go. Okay,
Should
Is
be
it correctly
homebound
reflected
and
on the
not
screen?
homeschooled?
okay, Jeff. We're never getting through this
Sorry.
sentence.
Wait, but now I'm confused.
Okay,
So if we say parent guardians of district students, if a student is permanently ineligible to participate in the activity, can the parent or guardian be a member of the booster club?
no. Okay, wait, a parent or guardian of active members. Like, the student has to be on the team.
So, Mr. Wallach, are you saying that the statement should actually have the last part of the second one as well? There, even if you're a district student, take out the homeschooled part, they still need to be permanently eligible to participate.
Right,
So you want that
right.
added on?
I think we have to mimic that to make it consistent, right? I think.
If that's the intent, then yes.
Okay. But then, if you're in a booster club and your student temporarily becomes ineligible, you're the parent, you can still be in the booster club.
That's why it's saying permanently eligible, right? If we're dealing with something that's temporary, that's not touching
Right.
us.
So I think if I recall our conversation, it had to do a little bit with, let's say you're playing a sport, football, and there's the football boosters. Maybe my grades went down and I'm ineligible for a week or two. My parent can still be a member of the booster club because I'm not permanently ineligible. Let's say I had a major significant discipline violation and I am permanently ineligible, then I, as a parent, am also permanently ineligible from being on the booster club. I think
But-
that was the difference we were trying to make by putting the word permanently in there, so that a temporary ineligibility due to grades you could still be in the booster club. I know Ms. Evans, I think, has something to add. Maybe she. Sorry.
So yes, I agree with what Dr. Smith just said. I think that is exactly why we put the permanently eligible, because yes, if somebody was on a temporary probation, we wanted their parent or guardian to still participate. I will say, I went back to the prior version. I think Mr. Warschauer is correct that second of is supposed to be an or. Because if you make it an or, then I don't think you need to add anything. It's parents or guardians of district or homeschooled students permanently eligible to participate. I think that does solve it.
Sorry, Stu. He was right all
The
along.
original version, the second of was an or.
Parents or guardians of, okay, so now let me see that. The guardians.
I do have one other thing then, sorry,
Or
if now's a good time.
homeschool. Wait, is it about this sentence? Because I'm not ready
It's
to
about
let
the-
go.
It's about the very next 2.1.2.2, so it's
No,
kind of in the
hold
same
on a
vein.
sec, hold on a sec.
Yep. Hold that thought.
So now it's going to say, okay. Parents, guardians of district or homeschooled students permanently eligible to participate in the sport or activity.
You're either a district student or you are a homeschooled
Homeschooled
student,
student.
as long
And
as
you're
you are.
permanently eligible. Okay.
Can I ask about homeschooled? Like, that sounds like kids who aren't enrolled in public schools. Could it be homebound or receiving district instruction at home?
I think that's illegal, right? Like, we have to allow homeschooled, right?
Right, and they are still, to be homeschooled, they still have to be a resident of the district. I
Okay.
mean, you could add the word district in front of homeschooled if you want to,
Really
hammer
drive
that
it
point
home,
home, but
Okay.
they do have to be, for them to be homeschooled through us, they have to be a district resident.
Right. But homebound's temporary, so I don't know. Go ahead, Jeff. Oh, I'm trying to, you know what? Here, pass this one.
So if we make the change to or, I don't think we need the next one, the 2.1.2.1.2, because
District employee.
a district employee who's a parent or guardian of a student, it's covered in one. Because it says parents, if we're turning it into eligibility, parents or guardians of district or homeschooled students permanently eligible to participate in the sport or activity, period. I think that's all we need. Am I right?
Does it say anywhere else anything about district employees? Because that's why,
I mean, it doesn't hurt to leave it, but it's redundant, I think.
but doesn't it say somewhere that
Right.
district employees can't be, like, that's,
Well, if they have a student, they're a parent.
They're a parent
They're a
or a
parent.
guardian.
Yeah.
So I think when it was a not, we had the exception because if the district employee was not a parent or guardian, then they couldn't be a member of the club. But they always could if they were a parent or guardian, so.
And I know it's going to disappoint Ms. Evans, but we don't need to have those 2.1.2.1.1. We can just have 2.1.2.1 and say, just that one sentence.
Just so there's no confusion, like, should it stay there that if you're a teacher and a parent, you can still be in the booster club? Go ahead, Stu.
I really hope this doesn't take us even further afield. But I mean, I think, when I think about what are we trying to accomplish with this policy, there are certain classifications of individuals that are not eligible to participate in booster clubs. They would be inclusive of students themselves, right? Not eligible if you're a student. I think that's right. 2, a district employee, unless you're a parent. And 3, coaches, or assistant coaches or coaches. But we opted. So I think that's like, those are the classifications of individuals who wouldn't be eligible. We opted for this positive language of eligibility, I think, to avoid any other community members that aren't the parent or guardian of a child. So that if you're somebody who just lives in the community, you couldn't be a member of the booster club because you are, for instance, a lacrosse enthusiast, correct? Which is to say that if that's the intent, then I think we're there. If it's not the intent, then I actually think like enumerating these are the classifications of individuals that are ineligible is actually more logical, because it's a narrow group. It's a narrow number of classifications that are ineligible, but broader. But perhaps we have already settled do we not want individuals in the community boosters? I'm sorry if that takes us further afield, but I feel like we're close to just saying what we mean in terms of who should be included and who can't be included.
Okay, well, I think we have it. I think the question is, do we want the district employees who are parents in there or not? So,
I
Dr.
think there's questions about that sometimes, and that it's explicitly stated will avoid any.
Stu, do you have a comment on that? No. That's fine. Jenna?
I'm a little bit agnostic. I agree with Mr. Wallach that technically you don't need it, but if it helps eliminate any confusion that comes up from time to time, it doesn't hurt either. So if that actually is an issue that comes up and people are confused, leave it in, sure.
Okay, teacher, go ahead.
I do want a clarification on the permanently, because is that the full school year? Or if once you're ineligible, you can never be coming back? Say if a student is ineligible because of whatever happened. The following year, the student is back on the team. Then is the parent allowed? So what do we mean by permanently?
Do we mean currently? Is that what we?
Personally, I interpreted it to mean the season. So again.
The school year or the season?
Right, the example of football, I might be permanently ineligible due to some poor choices I made in discipline that I'm not on the team anymore, but I would still have the opportunity to be on the team the next year if I make the team. That's how I
Yeah,
read it, but
and
maybe we need to clarify.
this is where perhaps permanently in a policy context is differently than, to me, permanently is forever, which is, I don't think, the intent of this.
John?
That was along the lines of what I was going to ask as well. Maybe permanent means something different in this context, but I don't know that anybody's permanently eligible, right? Because there's academic standards, and so you're eligible or you're not eligible. I think maybe when this got reframed, the permanent language is not quite working the way I think it was intended.
We're never getting done. Okay, so what if it said currently? Jeff? What do you think?
Or eligible for the season?
Or can I just say eligible?
Do we need the eligibility criterion at all? Just in looking at other districts' policies, parents or guardians of district or homeschooled students who participate in the sport or activity. Like, I don't see the value add of what we gain by the emphasis on eligibility.
I think that's the question. If a student becomes ineligible for the remainder of a season, do you want that parent or guardian to still be eligible to be on this booster club?
I mean, I take the season to be temporary. I mean, I was always under the impression that when we went to permanent, it means for whatever reason, and I don't even know if it's possible, but that the student can never participate. And originally it was in the language of defining homeschooled students. So I wonder if there was like an ancient reason that homeschooled students couldn't be eligible or something that maybe drove the original language that we're moving away from. So, and I don't know that, I'm making that up, but that was my concern. But to me, if you're ineligible for your freshman year but become eligible for your sophomore year, you only had a period of temporary eligibility. So I don't know. I mean, I guess flip it around. If you were eligible your freshman year, ineligible your sophomore year, and then back eligible your junior year, then there was going to be that intent to continue. I don't know, maybe the parent or guardian should be in the booster club for all 3 years because their child is in the continuum. So to me, the permanence had a different meaning, but now that we've turned it around, I'm not sure we need the word permanent or temporary. As long as your child is eligible, can't you be in it? I've befuddled things more.
No, I think I have a suggestion if the answer to that question is, do you want that person to be? But I think Ms. Evans has a point.
So I had a suggestion as well of how we might rephrase this. So what if it said parents/guardians of district or homeschool students participating in the sport or activity, parentheses, or on temporary suspension? So they're either actively participating or they're just on a temporary suspension. Being eligible but not actually participating.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't know if that's a thing, but just because you're eligible, but you're not actually, you decided not to join the team this year.
Right.
I mean, again, I guess it depends on what eligible means, and now we're getting into needing a definition. So I feel like just saying you're doing the activity or you're on a temporary suspension, your parent can be in, or guardian.
Go ahead, Stu.
I think 75% of Ms. Evans, I like the first clause there, who are participating in the sport. I do believe mentioning something about temporary suspension can get us muddled into another territory of what does that mean then. So I think, to me, the term participating is spacious enough to accommodate things like temporary ineligibility because your grades dip below a 70 or what have you. So I would advocate for the chain of who are participating in the sport.
I agree. I like that.
So take a look at how I wrote it. Parents/guardians of district or homeschooled students participating in the sport or activity.
Yeah.
Mr. Held had a question.
So I like that as well, and I hate to sort of bring this question up, but I think we're thinking about like eligibility in terms of academics. Is there a situation in which a student makes the team freshman year, doesn't make the team sophomore year, makes it junior year? And so that's not, their sophomore year would not be participating, but the parents may still want to be involved in the booster club. And so by the way this is written, they would not be eligible.
Pretty, I mean, that would be true. I think that's okay. Okay. So, we okay now? Anyone? Jenna?
you're ready, I'll
Okay.
lay it on.
Let me make sure. Are we okay with this? I can't believe it. Okay. We're okay with that sentence. All right, we're moving on to the next clause, and Jenna is going to start us off.
So my question here is, what if the head or assistant coach is also a parent or guardian of a student participating?
Yeah, I still think they're ineligible.
And I think that was the intent by making this a separate clause.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's a conscious decision, because we had thought about, I'm sure it's very rare, but it does happen, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I see it as like a conflict of interest. If you're a booster club, you're trying to raise money, and you're the coach, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea.
I can get behind that, that's fine.
Okay.
Should that be stated there, or is it redundant?
I think it's clear.
Okay.
My question, Ms. Ionetti, is are these substantive changes or not in terms of moving it to second reading, or what do you want to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, we really didn't change that much. Like, one was a typo, and then we just changed like 2 words. I don't think it was substantive. It's the same thought, we just had trouble getting it across, which is you're eligible to be a voting member of the booster club if your student is currently participating. We said it, we just tweaked on how we said it because we were struggling with that word permanently. And what was the other word? I mean, eligible. It was just those 2 words really that we changed. So I don't think it's substantive. Does anybody else? I mean, the whole thought behind it is the same. Okay. So moving on. Anything else in this policy? So this is a second reading, so we have discussed all this. Jenna, go ahead.
I had one thing, I think it might have just been like a transcription typo kind of thing. In 2.1.2.6, where it says in green, provided to the district without a fee, I thought that was originally students. Or we
Right.
said to change it to provided to students without a charge, but now it says provided to the district without a fee.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think that should say students, yeah.
And again, I had to students in my notes for what it's worth, so if the next question is going to be, is that a substantive change? My vote is no. I think we just meant to say students and we said district X.
Yeah,
Well, what is struck is district students, so.
right. Okay. Yeah, so we left out the word students.
Adding students back.
Yeah. Provided to district students without a fee.
Got the.
Take out the and add students. Okay. Jenna, do you have anything else for us in this policy?
Somebody else raised, and I can't remember who it was. Last time there was a question about whether this applies to things like, speak or UDEF, and I think the answer is no, but I don't know if we ever resolved that question.
Yeah, wait, UDAC? No, this,
UDEF, I'm sorry.
UDEF, okay.
Education Foundation.
Oh, sorry.
The ones that were mentioned, I just wrote it down. UDEF, speak, etc. Again.
Yeah, I mean, we did discuss that last time.
But the question was raised, so
Yeah, I mean, there's other categories, and we do have policies for those. There is advisory committees. We have 2 policies about that. And there's also a policy about non-school organizations. And so that's where those fall. Yeah.
And I think if you look, I just pulled back to the authority section. It says that it's about booster clubs and parent guardian organizations to various athletics. So I wouldn't say that like Speak is supporting a student club. Same thing with UDEF. There's not a student club or sport that's associated with it. So I feel like it's covered there. I don't know if others agree with
That's
that.
a good point.
Okay.
Okay. So we are ready to put this to the legislative. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Hey, who's having fun? So we're moving on to new business, and this is where you'll see how we will intend to show policies and notes for these. These are part of our review cycle in the 700s. They were run by our CFO, so Mr. Leckman was able to look at them. We compared some to surrounding districts. That will also be a part of our practice before they come to you. The appropriate administrator will have a meeting with me. We'll look over those things, and we'll also take a look at some surrounding districts to see if there are any really big changes or differences in what those things are, so that you guys have a full picture and that it's not coming to you and you're asking me those questions and I'm saying, oh yeah, good idea. So if we'll look at all of them individually, but just as a whole, know that there are no big substantive changes after reviewing them with Mr. Leckman. So if we look at 701, the only recommendation that I have in here is changing that small language to superintendent's designee for consistency, as we've talked about. So I don't know if anybody else has any questions, comments, thoughts.
Okay. Who would like to start on 701? Anything? No. Jeff?
It's really a 704 question, but I think we've got to address it in 701. So in 704, the last part under delegation, section 3.2, says the superintendent or superintendent's designee shall prepare a multi-year facilities plan updated annually and be shared with the board. But that policy is about maintenance. So I'm wondering if that belongs in policy 701. And either way, we need to make it that then be consistent with 2.1 that says the director of facilities and/or the superintendent's designee shall be responsible for leading the efforts. So if people agree with me that 3.2 and 704 is in the wrong spot, we just got to make sure it's consistent if we move it over. So that may be more than a change we want to do at the typewriter tonight, but it's that makes sense to what I was raising?
The movement of 3.2 in 704 to be moved to 701.
Unless there's a reason we want something about the facilities plan in 704, but I can't figure out necessarily what it is if that's about maintenance.
No, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I had something in my notes too, that they were so similar, those two. But I understand what you're saying, Jeff.
Where would you, I can certainly take it out of 704 or leave it there. We can talk about that when we get there. Where would you want it in 701? Where does it flow?
My suggestion would be to make it 2.1 and then just renumber everything down. And then we just got to make sure, like I said, we have to think about whether the current 2.1 in any way contradicts the new 2.1. Does that make sense to people?
Yes, I'm following.
Just to be clear, Mr. Wall, you're suggesting, so 3.2 of 704 becomes the new 2.1 in 701, and the current 2.1 becomes 2.2. All right? Or they're merged?
Probably separate unless we figure out one's redundant or inconsistent. And I need to read them more closely to get to that.
Yeah. They're up here next to each other now. So
I
you can
think the
kinda
way that it reads is you are saying delegate the responsibility of creating a multi-year plan, and then you're delegating the responsibility to the director of facilities and/or designee to be responsible for leading the efforts in the short term and long term. It makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess we should make sure Mr. Leckman agrees with that movement, that he didn't want that in 704. I mean, that's just like a check before it comes back for another reading, maybe.
Yeah, I'll definitely double check with him. I'm sure as long as it still exists, he'll be fine, but I'll definitely check.
You guys ready for me?
Yes, go ahead, Jenna.
I don't have a lot, but, and I agree with what Mr. Wallach said. I think that makes sense to move it here. It's more on point to this policy. So looking at 1.2 under authority, this actually feels more like an actual guideline. Like 1.1 feels like the authority, right? This is the broad, this is sort of what we're trying to achieve. But as we get into 1.2, it feels more like, you know, this is what we are asking for. Because we actually don't have guidelines in here. We just have authority and delegation of responsibility, but we typically would have a guideline section. And again, I feel like it's because 1.2 is it. And we might want to break it out into multiple paragraphs if we make that the guideline section, because there's a lot of stuff in this one paragraph, but.
I'm following. I think that makes sense. It's logical. So 1.2, there would be a new heading for guidelines, and then 1.2 would be underneath it, and then maybe broken down by task.
What we were saying, we're moving from 701, maybe that goes in this new guidelines section. I don't know.
It looks like it came straight from school code, so maybe that's why it's that chunk.
The new 3.1, that language, yeah.
And I had one other tiny thing when you're ready.
Okay, I do have a question, because now I'm a little bit, would guidelines normally come before delegation? We're doing it live here, so Jenna, in case you can't see what's happening.
And the formatting is going to be off, the numbering, we're going to get that later.
Yeah, yeah. We're just trying to get a look at it to make sure we're all have the same idea. Okay. So that seems to make sense. Do we want to go through and break it down tonight, or is that? Jenna, do you have an opinion? You want us to break the guidelines down into?
I have an opinion. I would let administration do that personally.
Okay. Okay, my one comment about, what's anyone else 701 before I go into my one comment, is, so at 2.2.2, it talks about the enrollment and the enrollment projections. And I just didn't know if it was, in the past, we have paid a company to do it for us because what is publicly available, we didn't think was as reliable as what is you could pay for to get. So I don't know, I just wondering if the board tonight, the committee, thinks that's something we should put in policy, that we want the most accurate information. And Dr. Smith, do you have an opinion on that?
You know, what I would just add is that I know that the district periodically does do a demographic study. We've recently received some results that we're looking through. I read this to mean like annually what we do, which we're preparing for as well. Right now, we're starting to have our meetings with principals. Here's our current enrollment. We roll them over to the next year. We make some projections for class size. That's what I read this
Okay,
section to
not the
be.
big 5-year.
Not the big 5-year piece. I mean,
Okay.
we do that. I don't know if it lives in this, I don't think it lives in this policy. I think somewhere else it talks a little bit about doing like a demographic study.
Okay. Because it is, to get that information right is so helpful. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a thought. Okay. So I think we're comfortable moving this forward? Okay. Jenna?
Sorry.
Okay.
Hold on, I gotta flip back. 2.2.4, I think should actually be moved out to be 2.3. Because that little section is a list of the things that the superintendent or designee shall periodically prepare. But 2.2.4 isn't part of that list. It's just kind of and all of those recommendations must be in compliance with applicable law. So I don't think it's actually part of the list, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so we just combine it, or it's already, recommendations if any. Yeah, I mean, do we need to say that at all? Is that what you're saying?
Renumbered 2.3.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. I mean, like, basically, it's just saying we have to follow the laws, which we don't need to say that, do we? Goes without saying. Okay. Are you looking at it, Jeff? You got that? He's.
Jenna, should it be a separate section or should it be a second sentence of 2.2.3? Because aren't the recommendations it's referring to the recommendations right above it?
Yeah, that'd be fine too. It's just, it needs to come out of the list because it's not part of the list. It's an overall requirement for the list. But yeah, Jeff, I'm fine moving it into 2.2. That's another option.
What's your preference, Joe?
I mean, I don't have any anticipation that the superintendent or designee would recommend something that violated law, so I'm not sure we need it, but if it's somewhat superfluous, but we can leave it in if people prefer. I don't know that it does harm necessarily.
I would second the idea of combining it with 2.2.3 as the clause after the semicolon.
Okay. All right, I think we are okay with combining that with 2.2.3. All right, we'll move that forward. Next one.
Okay, so 702 gifts, grants, bequests, no significant changes, but also to point out here, we will also be starting the continual practice of reviewing ARs once we get all changes kind of ironed out here. That would be in our review process. Those administrative regulations, as soon as we know the will of the board to any policy change, we would have that in our review cycle to go over our ARs so that we make sure that there are no outdated administrative regulations attached to new policies. So at a minimum in the AR, just to point out, we would be including that superintendent's designee language and then just cleaning up our titles. Business manager exists in there and Mr. Leckman is the chief financial officer in the district. Small, but still a change. Any thoughts, questions, comments?
Is the definition, Are the definitions new? They were all in there before?
Yes.
Okay. All right, anyone, thoughts about this? This Jenna, Jenna, you want to go first?
Sure. Couple things. So I think and this, I can say this once and we can just apply it to everything, but we were kind of getting rid of the purpose section and I think renaming it authority.
Right.
And that's in several of these, so I'll say it once so I won't say it every time. This one also has an interesting, which I haven't seen in a while, section 3 is called policy. I think that's probably supposed to be guidelines, is my guess. We don't really have a policy section anymore. I think that's just the guidelines section then. And then I have a couple substantive comments in that section. So in 3.1.1, it says that we have to accept it by resolution. I think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that's something a little bit more than just us voting at the legislative meeting, for example. And if I'm right about that, I don't think it needs to technically be a resolution.
Are you saying that that might read motion? Or just approval?
Yeah.
But, by approval passed or by motion passed?
Yeah.
I think we typically do it by motion. We did it last month for the wrestling club, I think. So I would say just change resolution to motion would be my suggestion.
Yep, I think that's fine. And then my second comment in that same, just a couple words over, where it says at a regular public meeting, I don't know that it necessarily has to be at a regular meeting. If we happen to have a special legislative meeting and we wanted to tack it on there, or wanted to have a special legislative meeting just about this for some reason, it was urgent or whatever, I don't see why it has to be a regular public meeting.
Okay, where was that?
It's in the exact same section, just a couple words over from the word resolution.
Okay.
3.1.1.
So it might read by motion passed at a public meeting.
Should that then be legislative? Yeah.
Legislative, yeah.
Regular or special. And I have one other thing.
Go ahead.
In the next paragraph, 3.1.2, and this might be a question for Mr. Diazio, I just don't know. In the last sentence of that section, it says, the board shall reserve the right to refuse any gift, grant, etc. I mean, when I hear the word shall, it sort of makes it sound like we have to reserve the right to refuse. I mean, I'm fine with it. I get jittery when I see the word shall, and is it really a shall? It's not a major question, but if we're running this by him, that's just something that stuck out to me.
I can ask him that. I know in looking at a neighboring district that I had pulled up, they just have, the board reserves the right.
Yeah.
I just pulled up school code. There's no shall, so it's not. Doesn't have to be in there. Doesn't have to be.
Okay. Anyways, Jeff has a comment.
I had two things, well, three, but Jenna took one of them, so. 3.2.2, the second part of naming rights, two questions. We reserve the right to remove or otherwise discontinue the recognition of an individual or group if determined that that individual or group, blah, 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 blah. Do we need to say if determined by the board? Because who's doing that determination?
Yeah, I think you're right. Everyone agree?
And then my second one in that same section, it's if the person has engaged in any act of moral turpitude regardless of whether it's a crime or not. And if that's something that's codified, like in the code, moral turpitude, okay, but I'm wondering, is that broad enough? Because, I mean, if somebody robs a bank, is that moral turpitude? I mean, it might be to most people, but I don't know, that phrase just kind of struck me as a little ambiguous unless it's required for us to say it that way.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
I mean, I agreed. It strikes me as outlandish and also antiquated language. I think really what we want to mean is if those actions are in misalignment with district mission and values versus making a moral turpitude claim. Does that language sit right with folks?
Yes.
It sounds fine. I'm curious, might there be other reasons to change that, the name? That, like, do we even need to say why?
Yeah, that's a good point, because what it's up, what the board might think isn't a good fit might not be what the person who donated the money thinks is not a good fit, not in line.
Just leave it, the board also reserves the right to remove, otherwise discontinue recognition of individual or group, period, to your point.
At any time. Yeah.
Just get rid of after group, put at any time, and get rid of all this.
I think so. Jenna, you have an opinion on that?
So I can't see what we're doing, but are we just saying that we would just generally say that we reserve the right to remove it, period? Is that kind of what we're saying?
Yeah. Rather than give an explanation why we would do it. I mean, the only downside to that is, would it discourage someone from donating? Yeah, John, that's what John's going to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, to the extent that someone is, because this is in connection with a donation, you probably do need to put some guardrails around it.
That was gonna be my comment as well. I like the language that Stu had suggested earlier. It does give us, or at least a potential donor, some idea, and they might, out of fear, not make a donation because boards change, individuals change, a period of time can pass, and so I think that there's some protections that we want to put in place for the donor.
Stu, you're winning tonight.
But I need you to repeat it, Stu, so that I get.
If determined that the individual group has engaged in any act that is misaligned with the district's mission and values, that can probably get better, but that, I think, is the sentiment.
With a period at the end of that, or do you still want the regardless of whether such acts violates a criminal statute?
Period, honestly.
Okay. Jeff, do you have another comment?
Did add one more, I'm sorry. 3.6.1.2, under additional requirements for commemorative gifts. A commemorative gift must conform to community tastes and values. Do we need that? Meaning, one, it says it has to be in concert with the district mission statement, which is very close to what like Stu just suggested over there. Can there be something that's inconsistent with our mission statement that still conforms to community? I don't know what that means. I just.
Yeah, I don't know how you conform to community taste. I mean, I can understand, I can see a difference there where, you could be in line with the mission, but maybe you've created some like gargantuan statue that like we don't want, even though it's in line with the mission.
So as an example, in a previous place that I have seen, the community or the Chamber of Commerce wanted to give signs and signage to the district, and they were doing this whole big re-signing of the area. And the district said, yeah, that sounds great. And then the community said, oh, that doesn't feel like it belongs in this community. It's too modern. It's too, so that might be where it misaligns. I don't know how that is here, but that's just a real life example to maybe keep in mind.
This language is consistent with what other districts have, and I think it gives you another tool if there is something that doesn't conform with this. I think it's another tool if you do want to raise an objection about the nature of a gift. So I don't know that it does any harm to keep it, as strange as it does sound.
Do we have to keep the taste in there? Because taste is so subjective. And I understand with the signs, the sign example, that may be taste, but I think taste is so subjective. Whose taste? The community has more than one taste. I find that one really troublesome. But
Well, is there another word that could kind of capture what we're trying to say, that it doesn't, like Ashley's example?
Maybe aesthetics? An aesthetic? Or what if we just remove the tastes and it's conformed to community values?
yeah,
Well,
that was my thought.
Yeah, the only problem with that is that's kind of like the sentence before. It could be in line with the mission statement, like, we want safe roads, but then we don't want these gigantic neon signs on every corner. Like, that's what so that's where you want something with aesthetics might work.
What about adding to the first one, be in concert with the district mission statement and values? We know what the district's mission statement and values are. Saying the community values, who is determining the community values? One, the whole board, or is it the people that come to the meeting? Maybe you make it the district mission statement and values, because that's part of a comprehensive plan. You identify your values as a district as well. I don't know if that's a way to.
I like that suggestion.
Okay. I am still concerned that we could be gifted something that doesn't fit our aesthetics, even if it fits our values and our
Maybe
mission.
collaborate with the district on, stylistic or,
Or maybe we need some type of like where we could say we could refuse it.
I think to Dr. Smith's, sorry, go ahead. I think to Dr. Smith's point, I think that if you're talking about reconciling something with the district's mission statement, there is room, I think, for interpretation about how widely applicable the district mission statement is, which my guess would address any concerns about potential conflicts with taste, as it were.
And Jen, to your point, I think in 3.1.2, we reserve the right to refuse any gift which in our judgment is not appropriate. So I think to Ashley's hypothetical, we could deem those signs not appropriate under that if we needed to, I think.
Okay, that's good.
Just one other further aside, there is language in there that says that you can refuse to accept any gift that doesn't contribute towards the achievement of the goals of the district. So if it's this superfluous thing that doesn't contribute to that, there's your out.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm getting texts about turpitude and where that is in school code. Thank you to my fan base. It's Dr. Ortiz, don't worry. Okay, so.
Oh, Jenna?
Yeah, sorry, I meant to mention earlier, but I missed the note on my page. So there's a citation at the end of this policy to 24 PS 216. So, yeah, you know, I love a statute. I did read it. There is a section, the last section of that statute, and again, this is probably more a question for Mr. Diazio, unless it's addressed elsewhere. There is a requirement that we have to keep an accurate account of all devises, bequests, grants, et cetera. At the end of each fiscal year, we have to render a detailed statement. I think this is covered by Mr. Lechman's activity, but I do think regardless, it should be in the delegation of responsibility section here that we're, you know, or in the guidelines somewhere, we're directing that this be done. It's obviously not something we're individually going to be doing, right? We're going to deputize, I'm presuming, Mr. Lechman to do it, but yeah, it feels like something. It is a requirement of statute, and I don't see it in here as a directive from us. Again, I think it's happening, but I still think it should be part of the policy.
So like a 4.2?
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe it's somewhere else. I mean, we can double check that, but I happen to see it, and I just always think that kind of stuff should be in our policy as well.
4.1.5, record gifts, record gifts which have been accepted in appropriate inventory listing and property records.
Does that cover it, Jenna? 4.1.5?
It's more than that. So we have to keep an accurate account, but then at the end of each fiscal year, we have to render a detailed statement of such devices, bequests, grants, endowments, gifts, et cetera, held and possessed by such school district. So I don't know. It sounds pretty specific. We don't have to solve it here. It's maybe a takeaway for.
So, Dr. Smith, did you see, she went to the statute and
Yeah.
that last paragraph? Okay. So she's talking about putting that last paragraph as 4.2.
I'll add the exact language later, but I made myself a note.
Okay. All right, anything else on this policy? No? Okay.
Okay, moving right along. 702.1. There are no substantive recommendations from administration. Thoughts, comments, questions?
Anyone? Jenna, 702.1. No? What?
Right.
Okay. So changing, yeah, purpose to authority. Okay, oh, sorry, next one.
704 we started to talk about in conjunction with 701. Any other thoughts, comments, questions there?
Anything? Jenna? Okay, next one.
And 706,
Ask a question though, I'm so sorry.
please.
Was I supposed to remove, since we copied this last statement and we put it in 701, should I be removing it? Do you want it removed from 704 or leave it there? And it's in two places. That was the multi-year facilities plan. I just want to make sure I captured that correctly. If I was to take it off of here, because I didn't yet.
Jeff, are you looking at that right now? That's the one where you said take it and put it on the other policy.
I would say take it out unless somebody, Mr. Leckman, or somebody has a reason why it should be in both places. But it seems to me if we say it once, it should be enough.
I think this is the purpose for maintenance, and that's the purpose for facilities planning.
It says a lot about what the board is going to do in this policy, but when there's like renovations and moves and different things happening, like how is it ensured that different plaques and commemorations don't kind of get lost in the shuffle? Like, is there anyone else who kind of needs to be tagged as?
What, where are you exactly?
But it just seems like it's missing something, so nowhere specific.
On which policy? Sorry.
Oh, am I on the wrong one? 702.1?
Oh, sorry. We were talking about 704, 702.
Well, you guys are on 704 then?
We can go back to 702.1.
Okay. So for 702.1, it says that the board's responsible for deciding if things are going to kind of sundown on plaques and things like that. But in terms of like facilities and building staff, making sure that nothing gets lost, like a plaque or something. How are we gonna ensure that those things stay?
Are you requesting that we add something under guidelines that reflects that, or?
Yeah, or like, you know, if there's a significant renovation, you know, a process by which we're historical things are preserved properly.
Is that part of building plans or renovation to decide what stays and what goes, and then that kind of flows through this anyway?
I would think so. If you're planning to do something like that, that would just be a natural part of that. Or wishes to have something in writing. I feel like this policy is not necessarily geared to what happens if we have shifts. It's more about contributions to the recognition of any contributions. You just want to make sure we don't lose any of those if there's shifts in facility.
We reserve the right to rename, get rid of something, but there are other ways that stuff could come back and see what's on.
If you have recommended language or somebody else does and where you'd like to see it added.
So you're talking about, like, so at 3.3, it says the board also reserves the right to remove or otherwise discontinue the recognition. And you want, do you just want a sentence there, like, otherwise the administration will
Like when.
maintain and preserve?
Exactly, yeah. Or
Can we
attempt
say-
to, like sometimes things happen and
I mean,
have good intentions.
so in 3.3, it's not very lawyerly, but I said otherwise. I don't know how to say that more formally. In all other situations, the administration will maintain these commemorative, this is where we are, commemorative or contributions.
Or memorial, yeah, like make a good faith effort to maintain memorial or commemorative, whatever stuff.
So we reserve the right to remove them or discontinue them or to otherwise maintain the recognitions?
Well, I guess I was reading it as, okay, the board can say we're going to discontinue this. If the board doesn't say that, like, we're telling the administration to keep doing it, to maintain it. So,
And I think that language says that, right? So you're going to do this, or maintain it.
okay. That's good. All right. 7:04, so we're back. Okay, so we were at 7:04, and I think we were all good on that. Okay, next. Moving that forward.
7:06, no substantive change, just change to chief financial officer's designee for language consistency purposes. Questions, comments?
Anyone? No? Jenna, any comments? What'd she say?
Just headaches.
Just headings.
Headings. I thought she said headaches.
Yeah, me too.
Authority, and I would change authority to guidelines.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Ms. Evans, I thought you said headaches, and I was concerned that our new
No.
format was giving you a headache.
That too, but no, it's headings.
Okay, so we're going to move that forward with the change of the headings. So we're moving all of these forward. Okay. Next up, 6.02.
So under new business, this is where you'll start to see those policy news network when we are working our way through what those suggestions are. Because we have had such heavy content in other areas, we have not yet made it through those, but you'll start to see those. So we'll make it through our cycle options, then we'll talk about the NEPNN recommendations, which there are none for this month, and then you will also see first readings for local policy reviews, things that have come up in the district that we need the attention of, make changes because of various reasons. So you'll see three policies to talk about in those headings now. I'll go over some of the summaries. We talked the last time we met about 002 and 003, authority and powers and functions, and we talked a lot about them being inconsistent and sometimes speaking against each other. So in 002, we talked about that it says local board procedures may be adopted, amended, suspended, or repealed at any properly advertised meeting by the full board or by unanimous vote of the board by a 2/3 vote of full board. So it's just very contradictory. And then keeping in mind that we want to make sure that there's consistent language in all 003 exceptions to board policies, while not typically granted, has a differing language there too. So we're looking for discussion to correct those contradictions and create consistency in the language and have the same language in both. Does that accurately reflect what we talked about last time? Okay. So we just need to decide what you feel the most comfortable with and use that language in both.
And I'll just point out, just so that you see, it's green in here. It's just calling out the language right now. We're not necessarily recommending that language. We're just trying to call
Okay.
attention to that
Right,
area, so
right.
you knew those were the areas we were looking at.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. So comments on this? Jenna, do you have a oh. Okay.
So are we just talking specifically for now about should it be unanimous, 2/3? That's the topic for now?
Yeah, I think we're just talking about, in both those policies, what does that vote look like? That's how, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Now, I think we may have to check, because I think under school code, there are some things that, if Mark were here, he would know. There are some things that you do have to vote a certain, it's either, sometimes it has to be 2/3 and sometimes it has to be majority. I just don't know what they are off the top of my head. I mean, my view is the default should always just be the majority, unless school code, or unless we for some reason want to, ramp it up to 2/3 or even unanimous, but I think that's a tall order. I mean, I think the default should always be just majority. And so, for example, in the next one, the next policy where it says, only by affirmative vote of at least 5 members of the board, I mean, I would always avoid specifying the number of members, because as we've seen happen lately, sometimes we don't have 9. So I really think it should be more in terms of majority, 2/3. I would never specify many members.
And I support that. I think unless it's in school code, it should be a majority. Do other people? Yes, that's Stu agrees. Dr. Thomas? Other board?
Local board procedures, is there, and I don't know, I didn't look it up, is there anything in code that requires us to have something greater to change a local board procedure? I'm going to assume no, because we do it in the normal policy type meeting, but we might want to just check with the solicitor if we haven't done that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you would prefer if we just ask Mr. Diazio what language should be in both of these, make it consistent, and if there's a reason for a difference, he can explain that, and we know that, and if otherwise, we can make it just common language. If you're comfortable, I can reach out to him for that.
I think that makes sense. What I was going to point out is it seems like as in the current versions, the ability to change a local board procedure is a higher threshold than every other policy, and I don't know if that's by design, code, or just happenstance, so.
Yeah, and to Jenna's point, we've seen, sometimes you don't have 9 people on the board, so then, I don't know, saying you have, and then if somebody doesn't show up, and then you have to have 2/3, or you have to have 5, I don't know, it gets a little, I think majority is what we should do unless we're required to do more, and I'm getting that sense from everybody that they agree with majority. So we'll see what Mr. Diazio has to tell us and go from there. Okay.
Could I add one more thing to just 003? I would just like to, just make sure the board is in agreement, I would like to, with 003, create a AR or a board AR for this that it talks about exceptions to board policies, but there's not, like, where's the form that somebody fills out when they are requesting an exception to board policy that, would provide the information to us to be able to make a recommendation to the board. Yes, we are, are an exception to that, or we're not recommending, and then the board has a decision. I've just seen in other districts a form that gets filled out either by the who's requesting it or administration on their behalf. If the board's comfortable, I can bring a draft as an AR if you're okay with that.
Everyone? Yes? Jenna?
And just to be clear with regards to checking with Mr. Diazio for both 002 and 003, because 003 also has this language of at least 5 members of the board in 1.2.1. So we're saying that we would check what is required by school code. Otherwise, we're defaulting to majority.
Correct. Jeff, go ahead.
I have something completely different on 003, so I don't, when the opportunity's right, if I may.
Go ahead.
What? Whoop, Jenna first.
Okay, so in 2.4, says about halfway through, the board shall be responsible for enforcing mandatory laws and regulations. So my initial reaction was, well, we don't really enforce, and I'll tell you why I say that. We ensure that things are enforced, right? And part of the reason I say that instance, if you do flip to 003 and look at 2.1, it's the superintendent who shall enforce. So to me, kind of the way it works is the superintendent enforces, and it's our job to ensure that things are enforced. But I'm not sure that we actually ourselves enforce anything.
I could certainly ask Mr. Diazio his thoughts about that as well. I understand what you're saying, Ms. Evans.
Yeah, I mean, in this particular case, we're talking about board procedure. So that's maybe why we are enforcing? Yes.
That's what I was thinking, right? They're your policies and procedures for your meetings. So this might be the only instance that you are enforcing, you know, you call rules, right? Nope, we have to make sure that we're passing that on. We have to make sure that we're voting in the right manner. You are the ones that are enforcing that. So I think that's probably the difference.
So is the sentence says we shall be responsible for enforcing not just our policies, but mandatory laws and regulations. I mean, that's a lot broader than just enforcing our policies. I think it's a good takeaway for Mr. Diazio, personally. I like to be really clear about what's our role,
Right.
and what administration's role, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, that's totally fine, but I don't generally think of us actually enforcing. We have to make sure they get enforced, and that's important, but we don't actually do the enforcement.
Okay. Anything else on this policy?
Not for me.
All right, moving over to 003. I know Jeff had something. Want to go, Jeff?
Sure. In 1.1.1, about halfway down, there's a sentence that starts, proposed policies and amendments shall be approved on a first reading basis at one meeting and adopted at a subsequent meeting not less than 8 calendar days later. I read that to say that our policy says we only do first readings and then we're required to adopt it 8 days later, which is not our practice, if I'm reading that right. Anybody else read that it's required? I mean, I read that to say if there's a proposed policy, we go through a first reading, and then we have to have another meeting 8 calendar days later to adopt it. I'm not sure what that.
You know, interestingly, I did look at that as I was reading this, and I read it to mean that those two meetings can't be less than 8 days apart. Like, you have to have more than 8 days between them to provide maybe reflection time, or I read it the other way. Not less than 8 days, which means from first reading to second reading, and approval has to be really
I
more
gotcha.
than 8 days.
Okay.
We could reword it to make it clear.
No. Okay. Adopted as a subsequent meeting.
Sorry, I was just gonna agree with Dr. Smith, that's how I read it as well.
Yep, I think that's on me. My
9
bad.
days, but it just can't be 7 days.
And we adopt it at a subsequent meeting that can be 75 days away or whatever. So, okay, I stand corrected, my bad.
Okay. Anything else on? Okay, we will move that one forward. Oh,
I
sorry,
think that's
Jeff.
something else, sorry.
It's hard when I can't see you.
Where was it? Oh, in 1.4, the second sentence seems completely duplicative of the first one to me. I think it can go. I'm sorry, 1.4.1. To be clear.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Agreed.
And then I had one other thing. Here it is, 2.4. So when written policy does not exist, the superintendent or designee shall have the power to act. I would just add after that, not that Dr. Smith needs to be reminded of this, but these are, meant to survive the test of time. I would add in accordance with applicable law or in compliance with applicable law or something like that. Obviously the idea is you don't just get to do whatever you want, but it's, within the bounds of the law.
Okay, anything else on this policy, Jenna?
Not for me.
Okay, anyone else? No? Okay. Move that forward.
We will also update the superintendent or superintendent's designee on those 002 and 003. And then the last in this grouping is 206, which I am going to pass over to Dr. Smith to talk about, as I feel like she is better equipped to walk you guys through this one.
Thank you, Ms. Kitten. So really, let me preface this by I am bringing this policy forward as a local policy really to just garner some conversation. And I imagine that you are going to have some questions or some thoughts or things that maybe you want me to research and bring back to you. So I am not anticipating that we will finalize language and move this to a first reading. I really think it's going to need further discussion, and it might stay here at policy for another month or maybe longer than that. So I just want you to know up front, that's kind of my intent, is just to start some conversation here and see what you'd like to learn more about. And I do also want to make it clear that, this policy does discuss in it, the attendance areas of our schools, which for us, really the middle school and the high school are the same. They're the full district, but we do have 4 attendance areas at the elementary. And I want to make it clear that I am by no means, in bringing this policy up, recommending any changes to attendance areas for our schools. That's not why I have put it on the agenda. What I did want to talk about, and you'll notice in the recommendations that I put here, under the guidelines, there is the opportunity, what was there, you'll see that I have struck as a recommendation to you, is there was a lot of what I will call, you've given authority to me in the role as superintendent to make decisions when a parent for some reason may request to attend at our elementary level a school that is different than the home school in which they reside. So for example, maybe a request, for childcare reasons. I live in this elementary school area, but I want my child to go to this other elementary school area. And while I appreciate the level of flexibility that you are giving to me in this role, I do think it also, I worry about maybe consistencies and determining what is considered to be, an appropriate reason for that particular change or that request, or to approve that request. I am very used to, of course, an IEP team would dictate if a child needs services that we maybe only provide in one elementary school. For example, Fort Washington has our full-time autistic support program. So of course, if you live in Jarretttown but you need those services, the IEP team decides that, and we would send you to where those services are. I also agree with things like I'm in 4th grade and oh my gosh, my family just bought a home and we moved, and I was in Jarretttown and now I'm in Fort Washington. The parents may request, can my child please finish 4th grade in the school where they're at? They may even request for 5th grade to finish their elementary program. And I think those are things that naturally come up and that we do. I guess I'm either looking for some more clarity on what the board considers an appropriate reason for me to approve some of these, or for us to consider that, the way that I have framed it is that you attend your assigned school unless there is some reason like the IEP that really for your educational program is dictating that you go elsewhere. I have done a little bit of research just to give you some background. I have the last 5 years of what the district calls variances. These are the requests that come in to attend a different school. We range, in 1920, we had 17 requests, up to 35 of them in 21-22, and then back down to 21 of them in this particular school year in 23-24. they range for different reasons, and I think that's where some of my discomfort comes with making those decisions, and not wanting to be in a position of why might I approve one family but not another? Are they similar? What are the guidelines? So I'm either looking for some more direction from you to clear up what the guidelines I should be operating on, or to consider moving in more of a direction that, unless it is an educational reason, that we are not necessarily approving those, except for circumstances like the AR. And again, we did not touch the AR until we have a conversation here, but the AR does call out things that we could certainly consider to be reasons. I also mentioned when I said to you in 003, I suggested we create an exception to policy form. I believe if we change this language to as I'm recommending here, there is still the possibility for a parent who wants to make a request to, under policy 003, request an exception to policy 206 that then I would value and make a recommendation to the board either to approve an exception to policy 206, which you would do at a board meeting, or I might recommend not to, but you could still approve at a board meeting. So it does still allow some latitude that a parent could make a request if they feel they have a really good reason for that or a basis. So again, I'm really just looking for some more conversation around the board's thoughts on the level of flexibility that is here. And I want you to know I'm bringing this from an equity lens as well as I'm looking at that. And, you know, I just think about my own situation as a parent. When I had little ones, you know, I had to find daycare within the realm of where I lived or out of that. Like that was, the school would not have made, you know, me able to make a request, so I want to go to a different school. That's one example of a reason that we might receive. I think sometimes there are other reasons. And so again, I'm trying to put my equity lens on as I'm bringing this forward. So I'm really just open to thoughts, conversation, what else you'd like to learn or see.
Who teacher would like to start?
Yeah, I just to clarify, for every elementary school, there is a specific area. There's no overlap between areas, right? Or are there schools where there is an overlap?
There is very
Because-
defined in the district, except for one community that, and I've tried to get my historical, so those of you here longer, but there is one area, community that I believe straddles both Jarretttown and Thomas Fitz. And to my understanding, that community has had choice. Now, I did speak to Mr. Robbins in transportation to learn a little bit more about that. It does create logistical difficulties because we also provide the transportation. So we might have two buses running to the exact same, and one child here going to Jarretttown and one here going to Thomas Fitz. So there are some logistical difficulties with that. It is a smaller part of the community. It could be defined if we want to take that step, but I believe it has historically been so for that particular area.
So that would not be part of this policy, like that neighborhood, affecting that?
I think it could be open for discussion.
Okay.
Certainly having a clear boundary is helpful from a logistical perspective. And again, where is that family choosing to go? Are they choosing to go to Jarretttown or to Thomas Fitz? And are there any equity or diversity issues related to what that choice may be? Would be questions I would pose.
Is that delineated in the settlement at all that occurred with the?
In the CAP agreement, you know, I have read that. I believe I've only seen curricular related type things in there. I can look at it again, but I do not believe it is in there.
I do not believe it. I did look at that today. I don't think it's in there. I'm not a lawyer, but.
I think the public perception is that the school choice is part of that. So that might be something important to consider.
Go ahead, Stu.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I really applaud the way that you're thinking about this, because I think if I heard you correctly, you voiced some concern about being the arbiter of a myriad number of reasons that families might give for an attendance area exception. And I think that's wise. My opinion on this is if we do truly want to be equitable, then getting into what are the appropriate criteria gets pretty tricky pretty quickly. Of, well, we're going to make an exception for this, but not for that. So I think the language that you proposed around educational programming is appropriate. I do also think that if we are going to say students attend their assigned schools, then a community that currently has choice, I think, complicates that quite a bit. Where I would say that if the recourse to asking for an exception for that there is a process of asking for an exception via the process you just described to the board, policy exception, then that's the means by which we address those extraordinary circumstances. I would advocate that being the sole mechanism rather than creating other standardized criteria around how we consider the validity of a request.
And I can speak a little bit to the, apologize, I just lost my train of thought there. You're right, making a change of that nature, I would imagine would be difficult for that particular community. You know, if that's something the board is interested in doing, we could certainly grandfather families. You know, if your child is already in Jarretttown, but you live in Thomas Fitz, you continue that. Your sibling, maybe you continue that. I think there's a way to do that. It's record keeping on our end. But I think we could find a way to do that or work with the community. I'm really just looking for some conversation tonight and see where the board's feelings are at. I appreciate that.
One thought I have is even with, you know, the special education exception, that opens up the door to like, well, that child might have a sibling. And so then maybe we would want to consider if it makes sense to send both siblings there. I think there's a lot of scenarios. There's a, it could be like just having that one exception opens up the door that we have to have an avenue, which you discussed, for people to ask for more exceptions. And then we're stuck in the situation that the board is now in, the situation that you're in is like, what are the guidelines? So just throwing that out there, that no matter what we do, there's still gonna be people that are probably gonna need the exception.
I'm curious, there's a perceived perception that as long as if you transport your kid, that you can request to go to a different school. And people seem to really like appreciate that. And it creates like, one family lives in this neighborhood, knows they want to move to that neighborhood. And, and then they made that happen. And they started at the school of where they wanted to move to. If we change that, like, is it stacking the deck somewhere? Is it creating logistical problems? Do we have data about, like, is the flexibility causing issues or, burdening a certain school with more kids than they're supposed to have, or things along those lines?
I have seen other districts have policies where, like, think about your seniors, and I imagine this is in policy. You move out of the district your senior year. There's a form you fill out, I want my child to finish. Most districts have that and allow you to finish your senior year. I could see something similar to that for, we're moving. You legitimately, like, we purchased a house, I have my sales agreement, we're gonna be moving, or I'm now leasing or renting in district or out of, like, there's those exceptions. For maybe the exact example that you shared, Dr. Thomas, a choice of, if I provide my own transportation, I get to choose the school that I want to go to, that really is not something that, as your superintendent, that I could support. If you direct me and that's what you want me to do, I will do that, but that doesn't feel right to me when advocating for all students. And all 4 of our schools should be equitable and provide the exact same programming and an experience for students that is great. And one should not be seen as or perceived as better than the others. I can tell you from our data from this year, most of our requests are not related to that particular community between Jarretttown and Thomas Fitz. Most are, and I do not know the reason, are requests to go to Fort Washington.
I think the people I know who've made those choices, it hasn't been about the school. It's been more about, like, I grew up in that, that neighborhood and we're trying to move there. Not because they think the other school is a poor choice or anything along those lines of personal factors.
And I'm not implying that, please. I don't want anybody to take that. I just think there's optics to that and what we stand for.
Yeah, I do think the intent of making it based on an educational or instructional need makes a lot of sense to me. There may be situations that are outside that may need special considerations, but I think they're probably far and few between. So for there to be a mechanism for that, as you propose, might be appropriate. But I can see the challenge here. And certainly if there's one child in a family, how does that impact others? I think that is that's a consideration, absolutely. But primarily it should be for educational reasons. How to represent that appropriate in policy, that's up to the experts, I think.
Jenna has some questions if we're.
Jenna. Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Evans.
Okay. Yeah, so I have a couple thoughts on this. I agree overall with what Ms. Sherbier just said. I mean, I think first and foremost, if there is an educational reason, I think we should support that 100% of the time. You gave a great example earlier, I think it was you, Dr. Smith, about, autism support at a certain school, and that's what the student needs. To me, that's a no-brainer. I'm also kind of generally supportive. I hear the stories about, I moved and my within the district, right? And my students at Jarrahtown, I moved into the Fort Washington catchment, can they just finish 5th grade at Jarrahtown? That to me, I've heard of that. That seems reasonable. I'm going to be honest, I'm fairly vehemently opposed to just giving choice because I live in Jarrahtown, but I always wanted my kids to go to Fort Washington. Like, that to me gets really messy. And overall, I would put, with the exception of the educational reasons, that I think should trump everything. But for the other reasons, I guess I'll call it, I think we should have, and I think there might be a little bit of this in the AR, I can't remember off the top of my head, but if we're giving one of these, I'll call it non-educational exceptions for whatever reason, I really think we have to be conscious of the impact on class size. What I don't want to see happen is we give one of these options and now we have to hire an additional teacher at the school to which that student is moving because now our class sizes get skewed because of an optional kind of exception, non-educational exception. So I think that should be, again, educational first. Second, we can think about some other things, but if it's going to impact class size, and that's impacting the taxes that everybody pays, I really don't think that we should allow it in that circumstance.
I believe that is in the AR. It's somewhere. I know I read it.
I had a question about some districts cap kids out to other buildings when buildings fill up, and then it gets sticky about whether, if space opens up, if they can return to their neighborhood school or not. So I don't know if we have policies around that and if that would be captured in here too.
Yeah, that goes along with what Ms. Evans said. The AR currently has, it's called discretion of the superintendent to maintain equality in class size targets. And it speaks to exactly what you mentioned, Dr. Thomas, that we could, if we wanted to, a family who maybe registers late or just because our class sizes are too large in one building, but in another, we do have the authority to shift families. And it tells you in the AR, like how much notice we have to give them, what the process is if they want to appeal that. I couldn't tell you from my experience in other districts that has ever happened or that a board has ever or administration ever taken that opportunity, because it has quite a few other, implications. We've typically planned for, if you live in this area and you go to this school, we figure out the staffing there. And then to Ms. Evans' point, there is language that if there is a request, but it would require additional staffing to make that request happen, that we would deny that request.
I mean, so however this, as we move forward and we think about this, we have to, and I know you are thinking about this, the students that are already taking advantage of this. And I don't know how, as a board, you can, for like grandfather people in, because then you could just have a new board, like in a couple of years, and then they could get rid of it. So that's tricky too. I don't know how we enact something and say it doesn't go into effect until 5 years from now.
If the board should choose to do something like that, I have seen language that says, starting in the 24-25 school year, students, will attend the school in which they reside. Those students who were previously placed in a school prior to that school year will remain and continue. Or you could put language that says their siblings could continue. Again, we'd have to track that. But I've seen that even for like implementation, the CAP agreement was mentioned. There was language in there that said by this particular year, this will happen. So might be a little tricky, but we could craft something.
Well, because, yeah, I mean, you would be enacting two different, like, for students who are not taking advantage of it, would go into effect, very soon, if not immediately. But for students who are taking advantage of it, for them, it wouldn't go into effect until a certain year.
They would get to, if they're a third grader and that exception has already been granted, they would continue their elementary career at the building in which they're in.
I'm curious around the impact and what percentage of the district it actually is impacting. And then in the community where the community members had choice, thinking maybe a family bought into a certain neighborhood because they could either go to Jarretttown or Thomas Fitz, maybe some language around if you can produce a deed or a purchase of a home before the year of 2023. Because I'm thinking that even if I'm starting a family, I may have purchased thinking that I can go to one school. So I'm just trying to think about what's the overall impact. I do agree with Jenna and Tichia here about at what point do we draw the line of choice as we think about where we're moving in town and understanding that there is an association to an elementary school. So I would be in favor of looking at this, but I would want to see more research around impact and who is it impacting and how do we lessen that impact for those families and community members.
And just to elaborate on that, when you say impact, do you mean the reasons that the requests are coming in for? Do you mean the location of the schools? And what, could you just elaborate more on that so I know what to?
So if I'm thinking about impact just for the specific reason, if I purchased a home in 2020 without a family, but understanding that I had a choice between Jarretttown and Thomas Fitzwater, and then suddenly when I go to enroll my kindergarten in school, I no longer have that choice, but I purchased my home thinking that I would be able to choose the school that I want to go to. That's what I'm thinking about in terms of impact. But I'd be curious from all angles, what is the impact?
Yeah, I think there's some point in that, but at the same time, I think the board has the authority at any time to redraw the lines of the district if that is warranted because of growth of a particular area. So I don't know that those lines are there, but they're not unmovable. mean, I don't think that's relevant for the situation we're talking about at this point, but I think those lines are not forever.
Jeff, go ahead.
But I mean, I agree that that's kind of a separate issue, because I guess looking at this policy, I don't know that we're right now talking about redrawing that choice area at all. So it's sort of like dealing with the issue of choice outside of that zone, I think, at least for the moment. And the other context, I think, that we need to think about it, and I guess first, Dr. Smith, to your point, is I would be curious, sort of the reasons and the schools and the impacts, sort of like all of what you listed there. I'd be curious to know that. It might or might not ultimately influence my view on the policy, but I think it might be helpful data for us to have. But I think from a policy perspective, one thing that strikes me in the current policy is that the time for me to stop talking. It strikes me that the policy says currently that we have an expectation of students within each area to attend, and I think one thing that we might be grappling with is an expectation versus a requirement, which, you know, it might be wordsmithing, but it might be a word with a material difference. And so it's just something globally, I think, that as we keep talking about this, we need to think about from a policy perspective. I also agree that the idea of having an exception for educational programs is we definitely need something like that. And I guess one question is, as we formulate this, one of the guidelines says a student may be assigned on that basis. And again, I guess this goes back to the requirement. There's nothing really in the policy that says there can't be another basis, which I guess then Dr. Smith gets to your AR potentially for some of those other things. So I think we also need to think about what's the policy versus what's the AR. This seems like, and I know I'm talking like in platitudes and not specifics, but I think this is one we need to think about on a whole bunch of different levels over the next however many discussions we have.
And I would add, just thinking about the point that Dr. Smith brought up around equity, is this perception is within Upper Dublin, are all schools equitable? And that perception, so it's bringing up a much larger conversation. And does our policy support that all schools one school is just as good as the other? And I think that changing and adjusting the policy does support our values as a community and the equitable lens across all of our elementary schools, and starts to tackle that perception a bit.
Mr. Wallach, just back to some of the comments that you made. Brooke greatly assisted me in pulling policies from other districts. They range. Some are short, some are much longer. That word expects, I would imagine, comes from PSBA because that's in almost all of them. So, you know, and I can certainly share some of this.
In I think it's telling in 2.2, the second sentence says, in assigning students to schools within this district. So I get that you could argue there's some ambiguity there, but I think that one way, and I think there are big ramifications to making this change, is if you change expects in the first sentence to the board shall determine school attendance areas and assign students within each area to attend the designated schools. Then at least you have there's parallelism between sentence 1 and 2, and it puts forward the premise that, you know, students are assigned.
So I've looked at exactly one policy on this, it's ours. And I was gonna ask for more information about other districts, and I don't know how they define who's doing it well, but if there's some sort of, it's working for them, and that would be really helpful to get a better understanding of. And then I think to Jeff's earlier point, it would be helpful to have a sense of what are the requests. And so are there certain themes that we're seeing, and then we can sort of build a policy around that. I think additional information in those areas would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's good to kind of know if we find out what are the reasons, that might be helpful, yeah.
I really appreciate the conversation. That was my goal tonight, was just to start a conversation to see what you're thinking and what more information you'd like, so that together we can make an informed decision. So I took a lot of notes. I will get some other information from other districts. I'll get some of the reasons and try to put it in a summary for you. And then, maybe we just keep this one on policy committee meeting for March to revisit it, and it can stay at first reading for however long that it needs to till, we get to a comfortable place, if you're comfortable with that.
So this
Thank
is,
you.
yeah, and so this isn't, we won't see this on the legislative.
Correct.
Okay. We'll just continue the discussion. Okay. 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 Okay, that brings us to public participation. If you would like to participate, please come to the mic. You have 4 minutes. State your name and where you live. Seeing no one, I'm going to close public participation. Our next policy committee meeting is Wednesday, March 6th, 7 p.m. or immediately following the education committee. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.